here in the Piazza Santa Croce, there's bright sunshine, there's people bustling everywhere. But 462 years ago, this would have been a scene of utter devastation. The waters of the Arno, not a few hundred yards away, had engulfed this entire quarter of Florence. The vast monastic complex of Santa Croce behind me here was utterly inundated, and no records survive of its institution for those decades. It's one of the things that makes studying the history of Florence during this period so difficult, because the records simply aren't there. Almost everything was destroyed in the flood. We can only imagine the chaos, but photographs of the aftermath of the most recent flood in 1966 can give us some idea. The flood of 1557 wasn't the first flood that Florence suffered, and certainly wouldn't be the last. The city's reaction to it was both of its age and somehow timeless. There's a strand of that reaction that relates to religious belief, so that the city saw the natural disaster as a punishment for its sins. But there was another strand that involved using culture as a way of reforming community and almost as a cathartic reaction to the trauma. This magnificent doorway belonged to the convent of San Jacopo in Via Ghibellina, and it shows the level of the floods here in Florence. This one here, for a 19th century flood that was catastrophic in itself. But the mark at the top is where the waters came in September 1557. This was a flood of epic proportions, and everything inside this convent was damaged or destroyed, apart from the crucifix, which detached itself from the wall of the church and floated on the river's waters and lodged itself against the door of the grain store. When the waters receded, the convent found that its grain had been saved, so the convent became instantly a place of pilgrimage and worship. The crucifix became known as the Speranza dei Fiorentini, the hope of the Florentines, and pilgrims flocked to the church until well into the 18th century. The nuns, of course, would have needed music to entertain and to inspire the pilgrims, and that's where our manuscript comes in. The convent of San Jacopo, with its miraculous crucifix, would have obviously benefited from an abundance of music, which would have enhanced the pilgrims' experience, but of course it would have lost its entire music collection in the flood. Even in 1560, Florence's convents were relatively strictly enclosed, so the nuns would have had to retrieve what they could from their damaged estate. And it's this situation that I imagine brought forth what we now call the Bifoli Sostegni manuscript, so called because of the nuns whose names appear on the bindings of the book, Suor Agnoletta Bifoli and Suor Clemencia Sostegni. Most of the works are anonymous, and some of them appear to date from even earlier than the end of the 15th century. And this is what gives the book a sense that it is a reclamation of pieces that were salvaged from the flood. The copyist of the Bifoli Sostegni manuscript personalized his work for the nuns. He puts their names into the elaborate capital letters, and sometimes you even see the faces of nuns peering out from those decorations. He even leaves his own name in one of the letters. It says, Antonius Morus, meus hoc opus fecit. Antonius Morus made me. Moro is a shadowy figure. We have no biographical detail about him, but we do know that he was in demand as a copyist in the years immediately after the flood. There's only one other choir book that we know was copied by Antonio Moro, and it's this one. Like the Bifoli Sostegni manuscript, this collection appears to be something of an archive
or possibly reclamation of works that were damaged in the 1557 flood. We don't know who PM is. This particular stemma does not correspond to any family whose name begins with a P or begins with an M. So the owner of this manuscript is a mystery. Moro did leave us one clue on this page here. It has a date, the 22nd of February, 1559, but more importantly, it has this motto, In Trinitate manet, canentibus favet. He who stays in the Trinity favours singers. Certainly it is a puzzle, but it may refer to the old church of Trinita Vecchia, which was the home of the company of the Buca di San Paolo, a penitent confraternity of elite Florentines that met on every Friday night to flagellate in front of a crucifix and stay the night in their dormitory before going home refreshed on Saturday morning. Almost all of the music in this manuscript is anonymous, apart from this one piece by Thomas Criquillon. This is the only name in the manuscript. Possibly this is the set of Lamentations that Criquillon exchanged for a barrel of wine with Bernardo dei Medici, the ambassador to the Holy Roman Empire in 1547. They got very drunk, apparently, and they danced. Although there are no names of people in this manuscript, the people are still there. And these portraits of singers, I think, are incredibly special. It seems as if they are singers that Moro knew, and the one in the altus is a very particular friend of Moro. He appears in the manuscript many times, and he's distinctive with his very aquiline nose and his overbite. Mr. Overbite also appears many times in the manuscript that we believe belonged to San Jacopo in Via Ghibellina, the Bifoli Sostegni manuscript. This piece seems to be at the heart of the manuscript. The decoration here is unique in the manuscript because it's a rebus. Here you can see a heart and two words, Cor meum Deus. Underneath the rebus, Moro gives us another clue about the compilation of the manuscript, because very faintly you can see in the letter Die 10 aprile 1559. This piece was clearly significant to Moro, and we may understand why it was significant when we realize that it is in fact one of the largest and longest settings of Lamentations from the 16th century. Musicians have known this piece in a much curtailed form, just this verse, a verse a little bit further on, and the refrain, Jerusalem, return to the Lord your God. Those verses are preserved in another manuscript in this library, and there they are ascribed to Antoine Brumel. However, the version in this manuscript is 19 verses long, lasts about 45 minutes in performance. Perhaps the most extraordinary thing about Brumel's Lamentations is that they're not in a format that allows them to be used in a church service. Instead, they are structured like a classical tragedy in 5 acts. It's impossible to see this only from looking at the music, just like it's impossible to guess the history of a building from its exterior. This modest facade, for instance, hides what is left of Trinita Vecchia and the spaces once occupied by the Buca di San Paolo. We know that the confraternity employed musicians for Holy Week in the years following the flood, and probably also before. It's not impossible that Brumel's Lamentations were, for them, a suitable spiritual recreation to enjoy after their traditional Maundy Thursday feast. I remember the first time I saw this music, and I knew it was special, but I didn't know quite how special. Isn't that beautiful? That's the end of the Brumel, the very, very near the ending when Christ is enclosed in the tomb. When I first saw the PM manuscript, I was only in the library for a day, so all I could do was take lots and lots of notes and lots of pictures on my phone. It was only when I got home and started to transcribe the music into modern notation that I realised the scale of the work that I had on my hands. It's over 1,000 bars, which is extraordinary for a piece of its time. So this is Mission Control. When I'm working, I usually have the originals here and the modern notation in front of me. Editing 16th century music is about transferring music from old notation to modern notation. But the thing that takes the time is not just the corrections and the checking, it's adding things to the modern notation that were left to the performers in the original. So that can mean sharps and flats, and above all, how the words fit with the music. Text underlay is something that can change from the draft and in rehearsal, and sometimes even in the recording process itself. And you can see by the state of my score how many changes have been made since we printed it prior to the recording. Recording Brumel's Lamentations took us 3 days, and it was only once we started to perform the piece that the dramatic structure started to reveal itself. And as it came into focus, it struck me that the process of getting to this point was something that had started for me as just a random piece that I was cataloguing out of interest in its copyist, suddenly taking shape and turning into something truly remarkable and important. This required the input of so many people: librarians, restorers, musicians, the record company, promoters, our producer, instrument technicians, and my academic colleagues. My journey with both of these manuscripts started out of curiosity. Curiosity about the people who made and used them. They aren't exactly luxury books, but they would not have been inexpensive either. Neither book has attracted much attention in the past, and I'm sure that's because the music in them is mostly anonymous. We might not think it worth the time it takes to transcribe it. There's no instant context or history to hang on to. And if it was any good, surely we'd know who wrote it. But this is a very modern take. Clearly neither Suor Agnoletta or Suor Clemencia or PM or even Moro thought this. Rescuing this exquisite music from obscurity feels like we are repeating what Moro did 460 years ago. You could say we are bringing it from darkness into light, or helping it break the surface after years of being submerged. In looking closely, singing and listening, we connect with the past and its actors, the owners, the copyist, the pilgrims, the confraternity, the composers, the singers, Mr. Overbite and the sweet little letter nuns. We can imagine a relationship with them, and at this point the scholarship, musicianship and our attention becomes less a labour of the intellect and much more a labour of love.